There are many iconic trains in Britain, from the famous trains such as the beautiful LNER and later Flying Scotsman service, to suburban trains such as a 4-car 4-VEP EMUs, transporting commuters home. However, the train that we'll be discussing today will be extra unique by being the only electric all-Pullman train in the world. This is the iconic Brighton Belle. My name is Jamie, and if you are interested in these sorts of videos, do give this video a like and subscribe as it helps out a lot. Next week's video will be about the mighty Penn Central and how it modified and impacted electric trains on the Northeast Corridor. So tune in next week for that video. Before we get into the train itself, we must examine of why the train came to be. The London, Brighton and South Coast Railway would start using Pullman cars starting in 1875. And in 1881, they would create the first ever all-Pullman train in Britain, named the Pullman Limited. This train would travel between London Victoria Station and Brighton. To those who aren't familiar with Brighton, it's a seaside resort city in the south of Britain. In 1908, a new train would be introduced by the LB-SCR named the Southern Belle. This would be the precursor to the Brighton Belle. Due to the Agada crisis in 1911, where tensions had risen between the French and Imperial Germans, the British government would form the Railways Executive Committee in 1912 to act as a liaison between the War Office and the railway companies. If mobilization was to happen, the REC would oversee this and work with the various companies to make it happen as smoothly as possible. Unfortunately, the REC would be needed 2 years after its formation on August 4, 1914, as the day would be known as the beginning of the Great War, which would tear apart Europe. This would cause a suspension of many popular trains as they would be needed for the war effort. However, what would come after the war is reformation. With the Great War ending in 1918, the railways would be in disrepair, as a lot of the original staff had gone to war, and it was not possible to keep the same standards of upkeep due to a simple lack of manpower and resources. The idea of nationalisation and creating British Railways at the time would be floated around. However, a new alternative idea was to group the railway companies into 6 distinct railway companies. Later, this would be changed to 4. With the Railways Act of 1921, 120 railway companies would be grouped into 4, dividing them by region. This would lead to the Big Four: the London and North Eastern Railway, the London Midland Scotland, and the Great Western Railway, and finally, the Southern Railway. The largest companies that would form the Southern would be the London South Western Railway, the London Brighton South Coast Railway, and the South Eastern Chatham Railway. Despite having internal struggles, merging competing railways all into one large railway, the Southern would set to work immediately, rebuilding and modernising the railway. While a small portion of the Southern was electrified already, it was decided that electrification of the suburban network was to be completed as soon as possible. 660 volts DC by third rail would be the new standard, as it was cheapest to install while being less disruptive. It is also important to note that the large part of the southwestern network had been electrified to this standard in the pre-grouping era. Electric multiple units would quickly replace steam trains as the main form of commuter travel on the suburban network. Due to the completion of these projects, attention would be turned to the main lines on the south coast. In 1933, the main line to Brighton and Worthing would be completed. To match this new electric line, they needed a new train. In 1932, the Southern Railway would approach Metropolitan Camel to build 3 5-car sets. This train would be designated the 5 Pull, the 5 indicating 5 cars, and the PUL for Pullman. This train would be comprised of a motor brake third class parlour class, 2 kitchen and first class, and ending the train with another motor brake third class. In the motor brake thirds, they would include a cab allowing the train to be driven by either end. Due to the kitchen cars, they would also be considered first class. They would be named while other cars on the train would just have simple numbers. One important thing to actually note about this train is that the actual train itself was not owned by Southern Railway. It was actually owned by the Pullman Car Company. To celebrate the new rolling stock, it would be exhibited at London Victoria Station and Brighton Station. On January 1st, the 5 PUL units would replace the steam trains on the Southern Belle. The new electric train would be able to cover the 51-mile journey in 60 minutes. From 1934, the Mayor of Brighton, Margaret Hardy, would rename the service to the Brighton Belle. This would be its name till the very end. Like all Pullman trains, service on board would be delivered by the Pullman staff. Meals on board would be relatively light. For breakfast choices, it could be eggs and bacon, grilled pork sausage, bacon and tomato, or grilled kippers, or poached haddock. Toast and marmalade would also come standard. Now, this was from a menu in the 1930s. The choices on the menu would actually expand to have sandwiches, steak fried fish, and Welsh rabbit. I do want to quickly explain that despite the name, it has no rabbit and is basically melted cheese with some other ingredients on toast. I will also mention is the lack of gravy with the steak, and any sauce which I find quite odd personally. In the 1971, it also has a large variety of drinks, from ginger beer, Pepsi, and a sparkling orange, while having a drink selection of your average pub. One important thing to note is that the food was not inclusive of the service and was an extra cost on top of the regular ticket. 2 sets of the 5 PUL would be used for the service, with 1 remaining as a reserve unit. This unit would be used for the Sunday Pullman service from Eastbourne, appropriately named the Eastbourne Pullman. In 1935, the train would be redesignated from 5 PUL to 5 Belle. During the Second World War, the Brighton Belle would be suspended due to a bomb damaging Unit 3052. To prevent further damage, the 5 Belle units were placed in storage at Crystal Palace Station. After the war, service would resume in 1946. With the railways damaged and bankrupt after the war, the railways would be nationalised to form British Railways in 1948. This would cause Southern Railway to be formed into the British Rail Southern Region. The Pullman Car Company of Great Britain would be purchased by the British Transport Commission in 1954. The BTC, as part of the 1955 modernisation plan, would modernise a majority of Pullman services across many of the regions by purchasing new rolling stock. Later in 1962, the Pullman Car Company would be integrated into British Rail. However, Pullman trains would still run. British Rail would also continue plans of further electrification in the southern region. Despite plans as a whole, the southern region of British Rail wouldn't invest into newer rolling stock for its Pullman trains. By 1964, the 5 Belle units would be 32 years old and hadn't been upgraded in any way since its construction in 1932. This was not a problem unique to the Brighton Belle though, and it was a problem faced by all Pullman trains. British Rail was modernising as a whole, and even the relatively new Mark I Pullmans would be outclassed by the newer British Rail Mark II coaches, which would have air conditioning standard even for second-class passengers, which was lacking on a majority of Pullman services. The Pullman trains were struggling as a whole to justify themselves to customers. The Brighton Belle was slowly edging closer to the chopping block. Due to the overall improvements across British Rail, there was a growing consensus that the cost of the Pullman services wasn't worth it compared to the modern trains or road-going alternatives such as trucks or even airplanes. The 5 Belle units was becoming old and the ride was becoming extremely rough. In the early 1960s, it was noticed that a lot of the original ex-Southern Railway stock was approaching 30 years old. A replacement was needed for them. An order of 18 12-car trains would be made to replace the older 6-pull and 6-pan units on the Brighton line. However, there would be no plans to replace the Brighton Belle's 5 Belle units. The 4 SIG and 4 BEP started to appear on the scene starting in 1964 and would replace the Brighton Belle's cousins on the line. Perhaps this was a way of showing the Southern region's hesitance with the Pullman services. Southern region would be wanting to get rid of the Brighton Belle in the long term. In 1967, the Southern region would strike off the Bournemouth Belle, which was a Pullman service, off the board. This would be a first of many Pullman trains to be removed in the future. This would be an indication that times were changing and the Brighton Belle's future was hanging on by a thread. In 1972, the last Brighton Belle would run on 8th May 1972. There would be a huge celebration to send it off. There would be a huge party and a mourning for the iconic service. While it had been in the British Rail corporate livery of blue and grey, many would still celebrate the nostalgia and the charm the train had had. The Brighton Belle would cease to be after that day. Well, what remains of the Brighton Belle? Well, unlike a lot of trains, it was preserved wholly. All 3 sets lived to see preservation complete, with 14 cars out of the original 15 currently in existence. The cars would be split up though, and be sold to various places. A common occurrence was for larger breweries to purchase a Pullman restaurants as a quick way to add fanciness to pubs and hotels. However, due to the high costs, they would not stay in this role for very long due to the high cost of refurbishment and maintenance. One currently exists as a bed and breakfast accommodation at the Little Mill in Derbyshire. Over time, the Venice Simplon Orient Express would purchase some of these ways as a way to add Pullman carriages to their trains. Motorbreak 90 would actually suffer an electrical fault in 1991 and would be lost in the ensuing fire. In 2009, a campaign was launched by the 5 Belle Trust to push for the return of the Brighton Belle. Unlike steam trains, electric trains had been somewhat ignored in terms of preservation, and this was a chance for the return of a heritage electric train. In early 2009, 4 out of the 5 necessary for a complete set was acquired by the Belle Trust. Restoration would begin in February 2009 at the Barrow Hill engine shed. The Trust would acquire its 5th car by trading with the Bluebell Railway. The Trust would trade Golden Arrow's Pullman kitchen car Carina for Doris, a Brighton Belle kitchen car. It would later acquire its 6th car by purchasing Pullman First Hazel from the Black Bull. It would be used as a stationary restaurant since its retirement, so its removal was quite difficult, but they managed to succeed. In December 2024, the Brighton Belle would enter a testing phase, and on the 28th of January 2025, a 4-car Brighton Belle had a shakedown test run, while being accompanied by 2 Class 20 diesels in the rail freight livery. Once a train meets the safety requirements to travel on the main line, central door locking must be installed, as well to allow for it to be operated throughout the Locomotive Services Limited operating companies. Central door locking is the ability to lock off the doors from a central location, for example, mud compartment. This is to prevent passengers from opening the doors while the train is moving. However, things such as emergency door releases, both from the inside and outside, must be also fitted. This means that the Brighton Belle will not be in its original condition from 1932, and must be modified to meet safety regulations of today. However, it's also a miracle that will be entering service again very soon. So, I'm excited, and I'm sure many of you will be excited to hopefully maybe travel on the Brighton Belle one day. So, that's some very exciting news for the future. Now, I just want to say thank you for your continued support, and it's really appreciated on this channel. I hope that I can always make content that you guys watch and enjoy. I hope to see you on next week's video about Penn Central. So don't forget to like this video, and I just want to say thank you from me, my partner, and my pet rabbit, Mr. Morris.